When my journey began as the dog whisperer, I taught the world there is no such a thing as a bad dog. Today, my message has evolved. But it's clear the people and dogs still need help.
For 20 years, Cesar Millan built an empire on one image: perfect calm. He was the man who could walk into any room and settle the most violent dog with nothing but posture and silence. But in his own life, that posture failed. Underneath that calm was a man falling apart in silence. Now, at 56, he has quietly admitted to things that would have destroyed the persona he spent a career building. So what really happened behind the calm? And why did it take him almost 2 decades to say it out loud? Join us as we uncover what Cesar Millan finally admitted.
Cesar Millan has become famous as the dog whisperer, the man who can tame the most untrainable dogs. But now he's being sued, accused of having a pit bull that bit humans and even killed Queen Latifah's dog.
An empire built on calm. Cesar Millan was just 13 years old when he crossed into the United States in 1990. He had only $100 in his pocket and couldn't speak a word of English. With nowhere to go, he slept under freeways in San Diego for weeks before finding cash work and eventually making his way to Los Angeles, where he started walking dogs for free just to be near them. But Cesar was quick to turn that hustle into something bigger. In the early 2000s, it had grown into the Pacific Point Canine Academy, and his reputation was steadily growing among Los Angeles dog owners who were frustrated with their aggressive, unmanageable pets. 14 years after he landed on American soil, National Geographic found him and gave him something he never thought he could get: his own show. And over the next few years, Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan aired in more than 80 countries and turned a self-taught immigrant with no formal training into one of the most recognized names in television. Cesar had a very simple and very effective pitch. He built the show around exercising, disciplining dogs, and showing them affection in that order. The dogs needed a calm, assertive pack leader, and most owners, with their busy schedules, or just because they didn't care enough, were failing to be one.
I began a brutal red zone rehab.
Holy moly.
Of 2 brothers turning violent against each other. That has left pet parents Trevor and Amy gripped with fear of their trouble pack.
Cesar even went beyond that, becoming a best-selling author, and launched spin-off shows, including Cesar 911 and Leader of the Pack. He built a 43-acre dog psychology center in Santa Clarita that functioned as both a training ground and a monument to how far he'd come. By every indication and by every visible measure, Cesar had built something very solid. His persona was calm. His entire brand was built around calm. He became the man selling calm to millions of households, and on screen, he looked like he had never lost control of anything in his life. The show made him a fixture of pop culture far beyond the pet world. He was parodied on South Park and Saturday Night Live and referenced on Jeopardy! And The Colbert Report, and even made the rounds on Jimmy Fallon, The Today Show, The View, and The Daily Show. For a man who'd been sleeping under a freeway less than 15 years earlier, it was as complete a reinvention as television has ever produced. But that calm image was about to be tested from 2 directions at once.
In the show I say I train people, rehabilitate dogs. So the reason why dogs develop issues is because owners don't set rules, boundaries, limitations.
The backlash and growing controversies. The problems started almost as soon as the show did, and it never fully stopped. Cesar's methods relied heavily on something called the dominance theory. It's the idea that dogs are wired to see every relationship as a hierarchy and need a human to firmly occupy the role of pack leader. Physical corrections were part of that toolkit, including finger jabs to the dog's side, alpha rolls that pinned dogs to the ground, and in some cases, even shock collars. It didn't take long for professional trainers and veterinary behaviorists to push back hard against Cesar. The first major obstacle happened in 2006, when the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior issued a position paper warning against exactly the kind of confrontational training Cesar was demonstrating on national television. Their argument was that it was built on outdated science, and instead of making aggressive dogs better, it could make them worse. In their efforts to stop him, the organization went as far as recommending that veterinarians should stop referring clients to trainers who coached dominance hierarchy methods. A recommendation that one of its board members later confirmed had been written with Cesar specifically in mind. One renowned author, Mark Derr, even wrote an op-ed in the New York Times accusing National Geographic of repackaging a debunked view of canine psychology and selling it as expertise. He called the show's version of pack theory a simplistic, one-size-fits-all approach to animals that were, in reality, as individual as people. If the protests were confined to op-eds and position papers, it would have been easy on Cesar. But it went beyond that. In 2012, demonstrators gathered outside a Rochester, New York, theater, where Cesar Millan was scheduled to speak, with the organizers noting that similar protests were springing up in other cities as word spread. The criticism took a turn for the worse in 2016, when, in an episode of Cesar 911, a dog with a history of attacking pigs was being trained using a live pig as part of the rehabilitation, and the dog turned against the pig, biting its ear on camera.
A little black and white dog named Simon goes crazy, attacking every dog he sees. Then he spots a pig. Look out! The frightened animal suffered a bloodied ear.
The backlash was immediate. A Change.org petition calling for Cesar to be pulled off television gathered more than 10,000 signatures, accusing him of using the pigs as bait and calling the method grossly inhumane. Many viewers reported the episode directly to Los Angeles area law enforcement, and according to multiple sources, sheriff's deputies, along with investigators from LA County Animal Control, reportedly visited his dog psychology center following the complaints, though Cesar himself was out of town at the time. A spokesperson for the network maintained that precautions had been taken and that the segment had been filmed in a controlled environment. But even then, that episode became one of the most cited examples critics pointed to for years afterward. Then, without warning, Cesar found himself against a barrage of lawsuits. The situation was a total mess. A 2006 case from a TV producer claimed his dog got hurt at the Dog Psychology Center. Then a 2015 lawsuit came from a nurse who said she suffered terrible injuries when a pit bull trained at the center attacked her. There was also the incident involving his own pit bull, Junior. A woman named Lydia Mattis, whose mother worked for Cesar, claimed she encountered the dog roaming unsupervised in a building Cesar owned back in 2017. She claimed the animal lunged and bit her repeatedly on the legs, and the injuries caused were severe enough to send her to the emergency room.
According to her lawsuit, Junior bit Lydia repeatedly on the legs, causing deep puncture wounds and lacerations,
and derail her track toward competing as an Olympic gymnast. It wasn't the only headline involving one of Cesar's dogs. There was a report that had also linked one of his pit bulls to the death of a dog belonging to Queen Latifah. Cesar was eventually dismissed as a defendant in the Mattis case, and the other lawsuits reached settlements with undisclosed terms. None of them resulted in criminal charges or convictions, but the accumulation of legal challenges across that period created a narrative around Cesar that sat uncomfortably alongside the calm, trustworthy image the show had built. By the time Cesar appeared on British television being confronted by host Alan Titchmarsh over footage of him striking dogs and using shock collars, the criticism had gone fully mainstream. Alan called the footage pretty barbaric treatment on air. Cesar's response was public, in a statement to the Daily Mail, that he was not brutal or cruel to animals and that shock collars were only ever used as a last resort, once other options had been exhausted. Still, the damage to his image in the UK was significant enough that for a stretch he became close to a toxic figure there. However, what almost nobody watching any of this unfold realized was that while Cesar's professional life was under attack, his personal life had since reached its breaking point.
This difficult dog is in desperate need of a home. Cesar Millan is the best man for the challenge.
Go, go, go! Like I always say, I rehabilitate dogs and I train people.
What the cameras didn't show. 2010 was the year everything Cesar had built started to come apart at once, and almost none of it was shown on camera. Daddy, the pit bull who had been his closest companion and an unofficial mascot of the Dog Psychology Center for years, died of cancer. Cesar has described the loss in multiple interviews as something that hit him harder than he was prepared for, which says something about the depth of that bond given everything else he had been through in his life. The grief bore down on him hard. Daddy was not just a dog to Cesar Millan. The gray pit bull had been with him for 16 years, since before the television show, before the fame, and before the Dog Psychology Center had a name anyone recognized. Daddy appeared on the show constantly and became famous in his own right as living proof of Cesar's philosophy. He was the calmest dog in almost any room, the one Cesar would use to help rehabilitate dogs with serious behavioral problems. And the relationship between them was one of the most genuine things about the whole brand. And then, within weeks, his wife called to tell him she wanted a divorce after 16 years of marriage. Cesar later said he was not expecting it, and that the news sent him into a depression he had no framework for handling. The divorce was not only the loss of the marriage, it was the fracture of the family structure that Cesar had built his entire identity around. He had 2 sons with Illusion, Andre and Calvin, and by his own account, the boys blamed him for the breakdown of the marriage and pulled away from him during the worst period. Then came the money. Cesar revealed publicly that he lost roughly $10 million to bad business decisions during this period and that he walked away with nothing left. Although he didn't go into detail about exactly what those bad decisions were, what is known is that, by the end of it, he was broke. On top of all that, Cesar discovered he didn't fully own the rights to the name that had made him famous. According to him, he had expected 50-50 ownership of the Dog Whisperer brand, but later discovered that the people he'd built it with didn't hold up their end of that arrangement. He described the whole thing as dishonest. The result was that the identity Cesar had spent years building for himself, quite literally the name on the show, wasn't really his to keep. Daddy and his wife had both been with him for 16 years. Losing them at the same time, he lost his financial security. And then, being cut off from his sons at the same moment was a convergence of grief that he has described as the lowest point he had ever reached emotionally or psychologically. Add the loss of his rights to keep the show's name, and what's left is a man whose will had been stretched too thin. Away from the television edit, that year looked nothing like the calm, controlled image Cesar had spent 6 years selling to the world. He'd lost so much all in roughly the same stretch of time, while a growing chorus of critics was simultaneously telling the public that he was a fraud. Most people would call that a breaking point. For the Dog Whisperer, it very nearly was. Cesar has since acknowledged that all the events of that year pushed him into a depression severe enough that he considered ending his life. He later spoke openly about this period in a Nat Geo Wild documentary and in subsequent interviews describing the summer of 2010 as the darkest chapter of his life. It's not a detail that fits anywhere in the Dog Whisperer brand, a show built entirely around the idea that its host had mastered calm. The man teaching millions of people how to project calm, assertive energy to their dogs was, privately, in a state of collapse. Cesar ended up hospitalized after a serious crisis. He chose to recover without medication and leaned instead on exercise and the work itself. If anyone watching this is going through something similar, please reach out to the 988 Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988. Cesar came back from it, and so can others. What's notable is how little of this ever surfaced publicly at the time. Cesar kept filming after he recovered. New shows kept getting greenlit. To the audience watching at home, the brand looked uninterrupted, the same steady figure walking the same steady dogs. The gap between what viewers were seeing and what Cesar has since said he was actually living through is the widest it's ever been in his career. When he finally recovered, it was not a comeback story. It was a complete rewrite of everything he'd spent a decade teaching.
He's the most famous dog trainer in America, but now Cesar Millan, aka the Dog Whisperer, is under fire for, of all things, animal cruelty.
Rebuilding the philosophy. The Cesar Millan who emerged from that period didn't just recover. He changed what he was actually teaching. Dog Whisperer had been built around a simple premise: fix the dog's psychology and the household follows. Millan's newer work, most visibly Better Human, Better Dog, inverts that entirely. His stated position now is that most behavioral problems in dogs trace back to the owner's own unresolved state, their anxiety, their inconsistency, and their unmanaged energy, not the dog's. In recent interviews, he put it plainly: dogs learn from people. Those people don't need training, they need healing. And only once a person has their own trust, respect, and sense of calm in place can a dog actually learn anything from them. That message is notably different from the one that made him famous, and it's quite hard to separate it from what he went through in 2010. A man who spent years telling owners to project calm they hadn't actually built now leads with the idea that the calm has to be real first, because he found out the hard way what happens when it isn't.
Look at her. See, she went and peed on top of that. Just shows you how dominant she is.
And working with puppy Tricky leads Cesar to a surprising proposal.
Better Human, Better Dog has run for multiple seasons on National Geographic and Disney+, and it's structured almost entirely around exposing an owner's own patterns before addressing the dog's behavior at all. Regardless of whether the professional criticism of his physical training methods has faded, and it hasn't entirely, Cesar has said that what rebuilt him has nothing to do with dominance theory. It has everything to do with being forced to confront the version of himself that existed off camera. In Season 5 of Better Human, Better Dog, Cesar worked with Brunello, a boxer who was roughly 90% blind, 80% deaf, and dealing with a neurological condition on top of aggression issues. Cesar said it was the most difficult case he had ever handled, and that at one point, the thought crossed his mind that Brunello might need to be rehomed entirely, something he said had never happened with any dog before. He described the experience as one that moved him to tears on camera. It's a far cry from the finger jab, alpha roll footage that defined the show 2 decades earlier, and it's the clearest on-screen evidence of how much his stated approach has changed. That rewrite didn't stay in the past. It's still playing out right now, in real time.
People in America were disconnected to somebody who we're in love with. You know, America is in love. I mean, modern society is in love with a dog, but they don't know dog.
What Cesar Millan is doing now. In early 2025, there was renewed noise around Cesar that had nothing to do with his work. Viral videos falsely claimed he had been sentenced to life in prison on animal cruelty and fraud charges. There was never any credible evidence behind it, and Cesar continued posting and making public appearances the entire time the hoax spread. Cesar is 56 now, and by most measures, he's busier than he has been in a decade. Better Human, Better Dog continues into new seasons on National Geographic. He launched a live coaching platform called the Pack Leadership Community in March 2025, and he partnered with XCell Brands on a new pet product line called Trust, Respect, Love by Cesar Millan. In February 2026, he teased a new boundary training invention designed to help owners keep dogs consistent even when they are not physically present. He's also expanded into a more casual format called Walking with Cesar, featuring long-form walks with celebrities discussing their own struggles as pet owners. There was an episode in March 2026 with actress Karen Gillan that focused on the psychological side of pet parenthood. The Dog Psychology Center in Santa Clarita, which was once the backdrop for his rise, is still operating at full capacity. And even with the earlier backlash and controversies, his social media following has grown to more than 21 million people across platforms.
I return to my ranch with Ricky and Bronny. Now I need to get this rehab back on track and see if this pack can ever peacefully coexist with their humans.
The project that connects most directly back to everything that broke him in 2010 is his work with Big Dog Ranch Rescue's Patriot Vet Dog program, where he trains service dogs specifically for military veterans managing PTSD. Cesar has spoken about this work as some of the most meaningful of his career, and it's not hard to see why. The program is built around the same premise that reshaped his own philosophy, that healing has to happen in humans before the bond with the dog can do its work. He's currently applying the exact lesson his own collapse taught him to people navigating a different kind of breaking point. Cesar has framed the veteran-dog bond in the program as something built on mutual trust rather than command. The same trust, respect, love sequence he now applies to every case on Better Human, Better Dog. 2 decades after Dog Whisperer first aired, Cesar is still a lightning rod for exactly the kind of exaggerated, sensationalized story his own life quietly refuses to need. But the real story was never the shock collars or the pig episode or the lawsuits, as damaging as those were to his image at the time. The real story is about a man who spent a decade selling the public an image of total control while privately losing control over his own life, and who only became genuinely effective at what he does once he stopped pretending the calm had always been real. Would Cesar Millan have opened up about any of this if the backlash had never happened? And does his calm, assertive philosophy hold up? Or was it always more about him than the dogs? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.